Hey everyone, and welcome to another one of our videos. Today I have a often overlooked but quite important maintenance procedure that applies to all vehicles, or a lot of vehicles at least, but specifically a lot of Mercedes. I'm going to be adjusting the wheel bearings and regreasing the wheel bearings on my W221 S-Class. This car's about 90,000 miles. I did one side of this job already, and I can tell you from that the wheel bearings have never been touched, never regreased, never anything. So it's very much time to do that right about now. Just to kind of explain the benefits of adjusting and maintaining the wheel bearings. If you do so, you can get enormous life out of the wheel bearings on these cars. For example, on my W140 S-Class, which I also have a video of this procedure on, I have about 175,000 miles on that car, and it has the original wheel bearings. They were just properly maintained and adjusted throughout its life. So, to do this job, you don't need a ton of tools. It's fairly simple. Some parts are a little bit of a pain, but it's not too bad. You're going to need ratchet and socket to pull off the wheel. You're going to need some wheel bearing grease. That is Mercedes part number, let's see here, should be on the front, maybe on the back. There we go. A002-989-005110. And that is the high temperature anti-friction bearing grease. That's the correct stuff for your wheel bearings. You're going to need a set of Allen keys, specifically a 5mm Allen key, a dial indicator to measure your wheel bearing play. Wheel hangers I like to use to pull off the wheel. Got a little tool tray that I like to put the wheel bolts and everything in. Need a hammer and a screwdriver or something along those lines to knock off the wheel bearing cap. And then you need a wheel bearing cap reinstallation tool or some method of putting that on. Could be a large socket. In my case, I have a 3D printed tool that I made, and I also have a block of wood to back it up so I don't damage the tool. So, with that, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do the bearings. Alright, so once you have your car up in the air, you have your wheel off and everything's all ready to go. First thing you need to do is remove the bearing cap. But before I even do that, I just want to give you guys a listen so you can hear how much play are in these bearings, so we can do kind of a before and after. So if you can take your brake rotor and pull it in and out, we're not turning it like this, we're not trying to torque it around the spindle, we're just bringing it in and out normal to the direction of the hub. If we do that, you can hear how much play that is. And that is all in the wheel bearing and the hub. It's not in ball joints or anything. I've checked over all of those and they don't have any play on this car. So what you hear, and hopefully you can hear that on camera and on the video, that is all in the hub. So this one's actually worse than the other side. The other side had about 4 thousandths of play, and for reference, the spec is 0.01 to 0.02 millimeters, which translates to less than a thousandth, roughly 4 to 8 10,000ths of an inch. So that's why you have to have the dial indicator in order to do this job and do your measurements properly. But that's what we're dealing with right now, and that's what we're aiming to correct. So in order to get the cap off, first thing I like to do is spray a little bit of WD-40 on there, or any other penetrating oil, Aerocroil, anything like that, just to get that guy loosened up. This is the worst part of the job, getting the cap off by far. Especially if it's not been taken off in 90,000 miles like these ones. My W140 was actually easier because those bearings were properly maintained and caps were placed, etc., so they weren't too bad compared to this. So I'm going to go ahead, spray penetrating oil in there, wait for it to soak in, and I'll come back in a minute and show you how to get the cap off. Alrighty, so to remove the bearing cap, and I've already gotten started a little bit, just to make sure it's loose and the penetrating oil did its job, but to remove that, you need a screwdriver, you need a hammer. You can also use a chisel or anything along those lines, file, something like that. Just something to get down in between the wheel bearing cap's lip and the actual hub's lip. And then to get it off, you just take a hammer, and hammer away. And it'll just walk its way out, rotate about 90 degrees, every few taps. And here very shortly, we'll have that cap come right out. And unfortunately for me, leave a nice mess on my ground and my pants. But cap fell out. We're ready to operate on the wheel bearing. All right, so before we adjust the bearing, the first thing that I do is clean out the cap and clean out the hub. So you can see I've scooped the grease out of the cap And what I do in order to measure out how much to put back in is I plop it down on a paper towel. So this is what came out of the cap, and what I'm doing right now, you can see on the other side of the paper towel, is scooping it out of the hub itself using my finger and wiping it down on there. Now you can also use something like a plastic pick to get into the areas that you can't reach with your finger, like around the bolt. Wipe those off as well. What I'm doing is getting out as much grease as I can, A, to make it a little bit easier and cleaner to work, but B, so I can put fresh new grease in. If you do this periodically enough, generally speaking, from my experience, I haven't had to repack wheel bearings, where you take the whole thing apart and clean all of the grease out of the bearing and then fully repack it with new grease from inside out. I just pack the grease in here and let it make its way into the bearing, and everything has worked out fairly well for me over the years doing that. So at this point, it's pretty darn well cleaned out. I'm essentially ready to go ahead and do the wheel bearing adjustment. So let me get some of the grease out of the way so I don't make a big mess, and I'll come back and show you how to do the bearing adjustment itself. All right, so I darkened everything down in here just so you can see the dial indicator as I show you kind of the before reading. So you can see it sitting right around 10 thousandths, a little bit off of zero. Each one of the tick marks is a thousandth of an inch. And like I said, we're looking for somewhere in the range of 1,000th. This is the play that we want. So if you look, if I push the hub in, we're at 13 thousandths. If I pull it out, we're at 7.5 or 8. So we've got 5.5 thousandths of play, which is actually a good bit worse than on the other side. The other side, like I said, was at about 4. So we're going to tighten this guy up a little bit, and the little bit goes a long way. So in order to start the tightening process, I just leave the dial indicator on. Doesn't hurt anything, as long as it's not in the way of getting the bolt out. Go ahead and put the Allen key in there to crack the adjustment bolt loose. There we go. Knocking a little bit of corrosion and stuff off the hub while I do that. Okay, so that's loose enough, you can see, for it to move. And I did loosen it some as well while I loosened that bolt, but that's okay. We want to be careful about not doing that while we're tightening, but while we're loosening, doesn't matter. And to adjust, all you need to do is, by hand, you shouldn't need a wrench or anything, turn this guy until you have the correct amount of play. So you can see I've turned it a decent amount from where it was. I'm probably a little bit too far now. But if I check how much play I have 0 play now. So need to back it off a little bit, but that's the tightening procedure. The biggest thing you need to be aware of, and I need to do this off camera just to be able to get my head and my hands and everything in here, but the biggest thing that you need to be aware of while you're doing the final tightening and everything and setting it in place is whenever you tighten this back up, you have to be very careful not to move this once you have your play set. And once you have this fully tightened, always, always, always double check how much play you have and make sure that you're still within the range that you want. Took me a couple tries on the other side. It's totally normal for it to take a couple tries to get it perfect. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and do the tightening procedure, and whenever we come back, I'll show you how to reinstall the cap and finish up the job. All right, so finished the adjustment procedure. That took about 2 or 3 minutes. No big deal, like I said. Got it first try on this one. So if you take a look, you can see we're at about 12 thousandths of an inch on the gauge. Pull it out, we come down to just over 11 and push it in, and we're just about 12. So we should be good to go on this one. So, gonna go ahead, take the gauge off, and then come back in just a second and show you the regreasing procedure and then the reinstallation of the cap. All right, so now it's time to throw some more bearing grease in here. So, first thing you want to do, make sure you knead up your tube of grease, shake it up, get it all mixed up. This tube's a year or 2 old, and it was certainly separated whenever I first opened it. So, in order to regrease, what you're going to want to do is take a good look at how much grease you took out, both of the wheel bearing, which you can kind of see. I push the paper towel over here, out of the wheel bearing over there, and out of the hub cap, or the wheel bearing cap over there. What I'm going to do is replicate that as best I can, putting it back into the hub. So, Mercedes recommends doing this by weight. They're, for most cars, if not all cars, is a weight spec for how much grease goes into greasing the bearing. If you're doing what I'm doing here and you're not fully regreasing the bearing, that doesn't necessarily apply. So you could weigh what comes out and then weigh what goes back in and do your calculation there. But what I do is just by eye, and as accurately as possible, put back in what I took out essentially. So one thing I want to mention is that whenever I'm putting stuff into the hub, I'll throw it in, kind of roll it into place while I turn the wheel around to pack it in. And while you do this with fresh grease, especially if your grease was fairly black like what came out of my hub, you may see your brand new grease turn black. And if you do, that's okay. Just scoop it back out and throw stuff in until you start getting the grease and making sure it's a little bit clean. If a car's not had this done frequently, the grease is going to turn pretty black and be pretty worn out and thin and everything. You can kind of go back and forth and put new grease in and scoop the new and old mixture out and keep on doing that over and over again, kind of like a fluid drain and fill, so to speak, in order to get as much fresh grease in there as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and pack this guy up, do the cap, and I'll show you how to reinstall everything, and we'll be done with the job. All right, so you can see that we have the grease packed fresh in here, nice neon green color. Like I said, the stuff that came out was super nasty. So, ready to reinstall the cap. Doesn't just press in by hand. You need the 3D printed cap tool, like I was talking about, the one that I made. I make these on occasion for folks, so if you're interested, shoot an email to the email address in the video description. I might be able to help you out on that. Take a wood block and a mallet and start tapping it into place. And as you tap it into place, you're just going to need to rotate around, tap, 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 so on and so forth. So, I'm going to go ahead and install that, and we'll finish up the video in just a second. All right, wheels back on. Everything should be good to go. One last check I like to do is spinning the wheel. Make sure it spins nice and smoothly, not jerky, doesn't just go half a turn, but everything looks good. Going to go ahead and finish everything up, put the car down on the ground, test drive, but job should be well done. With that, I want to thank you all for watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and I hope to see you in the next video. Take care.